Why are your novels so violent, so bloody? That's a question I get, usually from women who read the books in the Age of the Kingdom series. So let's talk about it. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that I'm in the process of writing a series of novels called Age of the Kingdom. 2 novels have been released so far, which span the books of 1 Samuel in the Bible. Warfare is a big part of these 3,000-year-old stories, and some people aren't sure they like how graphic my books are. Other people like them because they are violent. Why do they have to be so violent? Because I want to give my readers a feel for what life was like back then in Israel during the reigns of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. I have fictional characters as well as characters barely mentioned in the Bible, and the front and center characters. Warfare was ever present because the different people groups were always in competition and trying to expand their territory and their power. Often the Bible only briefly tells us about a battle, like the Battle of Ebenezer, which opens Quest for a King. But 40,000 Israelites died in the battle, so it must have been catastrophic. It happened 20 years before Israel's first king was crowned. The narrative in Quest for a King follows Eldad, a fictional metalsmith from the town of Mizpah, as he fights and almost dies in the battle. I want to read just a little of the description of that battle in Quest for a King. Unsure what to do, Eldad watched the chariot speeding right toward him, and in the last second hurled himself to one side to avoid it. But Jedediah couldn't get out of the way and was trampled under the horse's hooves. Eldad saw that Phanuel somehow avoided being hit. Those who escaped found themselves the object of the archers in the chariot. More men fell. Israelite discipline, tenuous as it was now destroyed, and everyone fought for himself. Eldad saw the shepherd use his axe to shatter a chariot wheel as it went by, causing the chariot to spill over. Eldad caught the side of another chariot and jumped in. He used his sword to kill the archer, then pushed the driver out. He took the reins and brought the dangerous horses to a stop. He then jumped down to face the oncoming infantry. A big black conscript attacked Eldad, who stopped the African's sword with his shield, then hacked at the man's shoulder. He cried out, but swung his sword again. Eldad dodged it, but fell backward over a dead Israelite. The big Philistine raised his sword to strike again, but Eldad was surprised when he was struck down. Eldad looked wide-eyed at the shepherd, who now stood facing him, blood dripping from his axe. "Come on, there are more of them to kill," the shepherd shouted at Eldad. As if to cruelly fulfill the shepherd's words, something hit him hard enough to make his whole body fly to the right about 6 cubits, crashing through struggling Israelites and Philistines before hitting the earth, where he lay still. "No!" Eldad cried out. He then saw what had killed the shepherd. Before him, Eldad saw a man larger than he had ever seen. Indeed, taller than he thought was possible. He towered above the other soldiers, both Israelite and Philistine. In fact, he was nearly twice as tall as any of the Israelites. "He has to weigh many times that of a normal man," Eldad reasoned in a moment that seemed to stand still. He had heard rumors of giants among the Philistines. It was the huge man's massive battle axe that had killed the shepherd, and he was raising it again, ready to swing it through the Israelite line like a scythe through barley. The men of Israel, terrified at the unexpected threat, turned and collided with their comrades in the ranks behind them. Eldad scrambled to his knees and tried to move away so he wouldn't be caught by the next swath the frightening giant would cut. In the midst of the surprise created by the appearance of the giant, Philistine spears rained down, felling fleeing Israelites. To his side, Eldad saw a Philistine with a raised javelin. Eldad instinctively rolled over to face him, then dodged and was missed only by a finger's breadth as the Philistine drove his spear into the ground. Eldad grasped and held the wooden spear shaft, and with the other hand swung his sword at the shaft, splitting it in two. Deprived of his weapon, the Philistine responded by slamming his shield into Eldad's face. Stunned, Eldad fell back and everything went black. Back then, warfare was up close and personal. They did have bows and arrows, spears and slings, which allowed them to fight at a little bit of a distance, but the fighting with swords, axes, and knives and shields was hand-to-hand, bloody and desperate. At that time, warfare was vital to maintain national identity and survival. History is full of people groups which disappeared after being conquered and absorbed by surrounding nations. And that did finally happen to the northern tribes of Israel. If not for the generosity of the Persian king Cyrus, the southern tribes would likely have disappeared as well. But Cyrus allowed them to return and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. So the existential threat was real. Since these stories are Bible stories, they are often used today to inspire us to courage in the face of adversity. Who hasn't been inspired by the story of David and Goliath, the disadvantaged hero against the massive, unbeatable foe? The stories are also important in sermons to show God's providence and protection. Quest for a King also includes the Battle of Michmash, in which courage based on confidence in God's protection allowed Jonathan and his armor-bearer to single-handedly defeat a Philistine unit and turn the tide of the battle, even though Israel was outnumbered 10-1. The Bible repeatedly refers to God as the Lord of hosts, which literally means the God who commands armies. So God himself is pictured as leading Israel in these battles. But the larger context is God's covenant with Israel and his promise to preserve and prosper them. Sometimes fighting was necessary to rid the world of great evil, as when God told Israel to completely destroy cultures that engaged in child sacrifice and ritual prostitution. In the Bible, God is pictured as meting out justice through human armies. Sometimes Israel was the instrument of God's justice, but other times God's prophets said he was meting out justice to Israel through the armies attacking them. This points out a larger theological theme that runs throughout the Bible, that we are in a spiritual war with evil spiritual forces. That war will only really end when the world ends. Jesus won the decisive battle on the cross, but the war continues even though the Bible tells us what the final outcome will be. Ultimately, goodness and love wins. In the New Testament, Jesus emphasizes love, forgiveness, and nonviolence, but he is still very much involved in the cosmic battle, And the Apostle Paul tells us to put on the full armor of God, including the sword of the Spirit. So Christians are supposed to realize we are in a battle, which may not be as bloody as those in the Old Testament. It is a spiritual battle rather than a physical battle, but the battle is an existential one nonetheless. So we ought to look at the violence in the Old Testament through spiritual eyes, realizing we are in a battle too. If you are a Christian, your Lord is Jesus, and he was both a casualty in the battle and its ultimate victor. His death on the cross was the turning point that signaled that his cause would ultimately win. If you think violence in the Old Testament was controversial, try this video. Was God okay with polygamy in the Old Testament? And if you're just getting started reading the Bible, there are links in the description below to 3 books you might find helpful. See you next time.